Atlanta during the FIFA World Cup, no less. My guest is a previous guest in the program last year when all this excitement and chaos unfolded with President Trump's refugee program for South Africans. None other than Neil Diamond, the head of the South African Chamber of Commerce USA. Neil, how's it going?
Hey, good afternoon, Chris, and great being with you.
Is it afternoon? I got my time lost, man. It seems like it's afternoon already.
I've been up since very early this morning. We've got a full program with the FIFA World Cup taking place in Atlanta. So yeah, my apologies. It is morning.
I'm lost. I've been bouncing around from Greenville to Atlanta to Monroe and back and forth. So Neil, it's been a year since we chatted about this situation. And last year, your organization got a lot of attention because you were right on top of the story. I mean, 5 o'clock, I think it was, when President Trump announced his executive order, and I think you guys put something maybe on Facebook almost immediately that this was happening, and then your email server crashed, did it not?
It did indeed. Within the first kind of 12 hours, we had over 5,000 emails that came in from South Africans. Within 24 hours, we were well over 10,000, and within the first couple of days, we were over 20,000. We ended up having 67,000 individuals in total that expressed interest in joining this program.
That's crazy. I mean, that was just in a few days. And then eventually you went over to Hatfield to the U.S. Embassy, and I believe you presented that information to the government?
Yeah, so the SACUSA board actually said that that's not our space. We shouldn't be involved with the refugee and humanitarian program. They requested a small delegation to travel to South Africa and take all the information we have gathered and hand that over to the U.S. mission in South Africa. At the time, Ambassador Brigadier has already left. And so we handed over to the Charge d'Affaires in Hatfield in Pretoria. And we then basically advised people that we've closed it off from our side and that any further interest should be directed through to the correct channels, which was the U.S. Embassy in South Africa.
Well, and that makes sense to me based on what your organization's role is. And I think you were caught unawares. You were just sharing with people information that was out there, and suddenly you're kind of sort of being drug into it. It sounds like your board made the right decision to pull back.
I think in hindsight, that was absolutely the right decision to make. Our mandate is the promotion of trade, investment, and tourism between South Africa and the US, and then promoting South African businesses in the United States. Exactly where we are sitting today is where our South African fan park is for the FIFA World Cup. It's a local business that is from South Africa and supports South Africa. So being involved in the refugee program would have been a huge mistake for us. Having said that, it doesn't mean that we have stepped away completely from South Africans coming to the US, irrespective under which program they do.
Well, in fact, Neil, your organization, if I'm not mistaken, has a handbook for South Africans living in America. And it's not just for expats that come over here on L visas or H-2A visas or H-1B visas. It's available to any South African and actually can be beneficial to the refugees if they want to download and use it. Fair?
Absolutely. So we developed a soft skills guide for South Africans immigrating to the United States. We've made that available on our website. We found that in the biggest part, South Africans that come under the refugee program really don't know what to expect when they come to the United States.
I think you're right about that, Neil.
What we wanted to do is to just lessen the blow a little bit, make it for them so that they are able to be as successful as possible once they come to the United States. And the manual is approximately 120 pages. Ooh. It is available on our website. It was compiled by members from our diaspora, South African diaspora community. It was business people that gave inputs, and then we had refugees providing their own inputs so that we could be as thorough as possible. Chris, it doesn't include everything. I know you share great information on a regular basis with the refugees. So, there's a lot of resources out there, including yourselves. But we would encourage people to take the manual and use it. It covers everything from soft skills in the workplace straight through to DUIs.
Well, Neil, let me change gears a little bit here and talk about your organization, South African Chamber of Commerce in the USA. We also have Chamber of Commerces in countries abroad. We have one in South Africa. And the role of these, as I understand, as a layperson, is that you sort of explained a little bit earlier, is to promote trade and interaction between the countries, and also to help for the Americans in South Africa. They would try to help American businesses get into South Africa and help South African businesses relate to folks over here. And it kind of with the FIFA World Cup right here in your back door, it's really in your wheelhouse what you're doing right now, is it not?
Absolutely. So in the run-up to the FIFA World Cup, right here in Atlanta, but also in other host cities in the United States, we've tried to see how could we incorporate some South African business and some of the lessons that we've learned during the 2010 FIFA World Cup. I had the privilege of coming out of local government, had a lot of experience with the FIFA World Cup back in 2010. And as a South African Chamber, we shared some of that information with the city of Atlanta, but also with other cities in and around the United States, and created an opportunity and a platform where South African businesses from South Africa could capitalize and make use of this platform to generate income, to come and see what business in the US is all about, and use the opportunity to share some of our South African culture while at the same time promoting trade, investment, and tourism.
Well, I have to say that going to events around the world, particularly Rugby World Cups, you know, I'm a big rugby fan and a play-by-play and color commentator for that game. I've gone to New Zealand and to France and to England for World Cups, and there's always South Africans there that are trying to represent and share the culture of South Africa, not just the rugby culture, but, you know, Doorvoorts and Biltong and, you know, and Miltart and all those other things that are clearly South African. It's interesting. So I think that's a good role. Now, my question is, with the South African Chamber of Commerce USA, this is a big country. I mean, you know, the South African government has a consulate in Los Angeles, their embassy is in DC. It's a lot of ground to cover. Are you able to successfully cover it, or do you find it challenging reaching out to help someone, say, if they want to do business in Idaho with Micron Technology, for example? I'm just throwing something out there. It seems like something you try to help with, but is it challenging for you?
Given the sheer size of the United States, it is a significant challenge. The South African Chamber of Commerce in the US is part of a global network of South African chambers in other countries like Japan, South Korea, Singapore, the UK, and a number in Europe. And it's easier in those countries just because of the geographical size. The UK chamber has got a lot of the activities centered around London. So it's not a problem for them to have a happy hour and have a host of their members join in. It's a little bit more difficult in the US because our member is so widely spread. When we do activities, it's more of a virtual nature, but we work very, very closely with the embassy in Washington, DC, the consulate in New York, as well as the consulate in Los Angeles. And we leverage those investment officers and offices that South Africa has established in those areas so that we can connect with our communities. In certain areas, we've got standalone structures, like in New York, we've got the South African New York Business Council, and those are really the big dogs. Those are the guys that are represented on Wall Street. There are some South African companies that are actually listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So there it is different. But your example of reaching out to somebody in the Midwest as an example, it is a challenge. But the Chamber is a very good catalyst to engage a local city, a state, a Department of Economic Development, and assist South Africans to navigate doing business in the United States. We're a resource. We're not your typical Chamber of Commerce where an insurance broker is going to meet a banker and they're going to do business. We focus more on trade policy, and how we can assist bilateral trade, binational trade. South Africans wanting to do business in the US, but at the same time, US investors looking at investment opportunities out in South Africa.
Well, Neil, it would seem to me that you personally are pretty well positioned for the role that you're in. You spent a fair amount of time in government in South Africa, so you understand how South African government works and have an appreciation for the challenges and the advantages that are there, and how that may play out for people trying to do business in the U.S. So I suspect that this is a role that maybe that, I don't know if it's something you sought at some point, but it seems like you're well suited for this role. I'm not trying to butter you up.
No, if there's one thing I know, Chris, you give the facts as they are. You're a very straight shooter. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, when I moved over to the US, I originally had a different idea. I was engaged to work at the World Bank in Washington, DC, but this was literally just before COVID. So by the time I got around to actually focus on that employment opportunity, it wasn't there anymore, and I had to find something else. At the time, I knew our ambassador, Noma India Mfaketu, quite well, and she reached out to me and said, "Hey, Neil, we've got the South African Chamber. It's dormant at the moment. It's mainly been run by expats since about the 80s. And every time the expats leave, there's no continuity. Is this something you would be interested in?" Well, I had the capacity, I had the bandwidth, I had the time, and I jumped into it. And I'm very thankful to say it's not about me as an individual. It's our community of business people in the United States, our South African diaspora. There's great people that work with me. that's excited still about South Africa, about the opportunities that are within South Africa, and the great products that South Africa has that has traction within the United States. Our wines is, for instance, a very good example where our South Africans are super successful in bringing wine out to the US, but also agro-processed goods. I'm going to give an example of our Oryx salt that is available at Whole Foods. And that is a local company in South Africa that has been able to access the global market through the channel that we have established and that we have made available. So I try with everybody around me, but it's important to note it's not about me as an individual. We're a collective that work to make South African trade a reality for businesses in South Africa into the United States.
Well, Neil, you talk about South African products, and it sounds like you talk about it with a degree of pride, which is understandable. There's some fantastic products, not just agricultural, but also manufactured things. One of the things that I find fascinating, I would really like to see take off in the U.S., and I think it's starting to, and that's Veldskoen, the Fellies. I mean, I have 6 pair. I buy Freedom of Movement pair every time I go back to South Africa. They're amazing, and they're comfortable, they're reliable, they're durable, and it's a very South African thing. Any idea, is that market catching on, or is it just nascent?
Oh, absolutely, Chris, and that's a very good example. So Veldskoen is actually warehoused right here in Atlanta. Atlanta is a major distribution hub in the United States and a great port of entry. Even though we're not on the coast, the port of Savannah is the largest port on the East Coast in Georgia. Now, Veldskoen 2 years ago had an activation with us during NASCAR. The South African Chamber of Commerce with Arno Kok and the South African NASCAR team set out to do a NASCAR race here in Atlanta, and Veldskoen was on the car. I'd be happy to share those images with you.
Yeah, I'd love to see those. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry, I'm not a big NASCAR fan. That's south of the border for me. My mother was into NASCAR, and I never got it. But then I had free tickets to go to Delaware, to Dover, to the racetrack, and I'm like, okay, I'll take the tickets and go down there. And I was like, wow, now I get why people like this. But I tell you what, I learned a lesson about wearing hearing protection that day. But yeah, I didn't know that. So, you know, another brand for footwear that's actually sold in the United States and people buy it or religiously loyal to it. One that I became familiar with, I went to the factory, and that, of course, that's in KwaZulu-Natal, and that's Jim Green. Jim Green is also around. I don't think a lot of people know about that brand, but people around the world swear by their Ranger boots.
That is just one example of a couple of other South African shoe manufacturers. South Africa's got a shoe and leather export council that annually bring out South African businesses with the Department of Trade and Industry in South Africa to the annual Atlanta Footwear and Leather Show. That's the largest footwear and leather show in the United States. And they make some amazing shoes. And there are new entrants on an ongoing basis. The big thing is just not everybody is export ready. And we normally encourage South African businesses that look at entering the US market to get as much information they can locally, join some of the local trade associations like the South African Leather and Footwear Export Council to guide them in terms of those export pitfalls. You don't want to have a great product that does exceptionally well in South Africa, and the minute you enter the US market, they kind of take your entire annual production with one order, and you mace it with limited capacity to serve your local market.
Well, that's a good point. And this is a market that could very well do that to a manufacturer. That's a tough one. So, Neil, for 25 years before it temporarily expired, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, this is my view, and I was involved with it in many ways, was a very generous program that allowed African countries that were voluntarily willing to meet governance standards, like spending X amount of money on healthcare or good governance, also, respecting property rights, things like that. If they voluntarily agreed to do that, the U.S. government gave them duty-free access for a list of products and services came into America. And over that 25-year period, arguably, I mean, without question, the largest beneficiary of Africa Growth and Opportunity Act was South Africa by a wide measure. Many African countries didn't pursue it. Eventually, we had 38 countries. Some came on the list, some came off the list. But then it briefly expired last year, but President Trump signed legislation that extends it through the end of this year. South Africa's in Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, and my viewers know my view on that, but that's not what this conversation is about. So I want to ask you, Neil, are you guys, obviously, you must stay in tune with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. Do you interact with the government and with the South African American government about this? Because obviously that duty-free advantage is a huge benefit for, say, BMW parts manufacturers in South Africa shipping here to the U.S. over the German parts, which have a tariff on them, as well as many other things, the Veldskoen, the agricultural products. it would seem to me that this is $3 billion of trade in the most recent reporting year that was excluded from taxation and excise duty. This is something South Africans want to maintain.
Absolutely, Chris. But I think at the same time, we need to be mindful about why the administration made certain changes and what was the criticism about AGOA. The introduction of reciprocal trade tariffs was exactly that, to ensure that there's a more fair trade balance between Africa and the United States. It was originally designed to replace aid in Africa with trade. And AGOA came about, and South Africa, as you rightfully said, has been the single biggest beneficiary of AGOA and tariff-free export to the United States. The challenge, however, that exists for us is that South Africa has for quite a significant period not necessarily met all the requirements for AGOA. And if we strip out the 5 large auto manufacturers and the components that are manufactured in South Africa for those auto manufacturers, the balance of AGOA is a very small amount. And we need to see how do we get more products from more manufacturers across a broad base of industries exported to the United States. And the reason why South Africa has maintained its position within AGOA is because US auto manufacturers have enjoyed the benefit of a fairly robust labor market in South Africa that can manufacture goods at a certain price point. But it's also important to note that senators like Senator Kennedy have made it very clear that South Africa needs to be a good steward of the relationship, needs to be a good friend of the United States. And you need to ensure that there's geopolitical alignment with not only your geopolitical allies, but also your trade partners and trade allies. And that is where the real challenge comes in. Now, I've made it very clear that as the chamber, we're apolitical. We've got an economic focus, not a political focus, but we'd be oblivious not to see the challenges on the economic relationship as it relates to foreign policy and South Africa's economic environment as it stands towards its geopolitical partners.
Well, Neil, along those lines, agreed 100% with you that very South African of me to say that 100%. If I'm honest,
I like it.
If I'm honest, yeah, that's my favorite South African phrase. What else would you be but honest? If I'm honest, no, but seriously, it's great that you guys are apolitical and focus on economics. I mean, South Africa needs a focus on economics, macroeconomic policy, trade, exports. A lot of the trade goes to Asia, and it's commodities. A lot of it's commodities, and manufactured goods come back the other direction. You don't get the benefication. Whereas the trade with America, most of that is something where the value chain has been all applied in South Africa, and you're sending a finished product for the most part. And that's, like you talked about, the automotive sector. That's fantastic because that keeps the wealth in South Africa and employs a much broader spectrum of the labor force. Yes?
Absolutely, Chris. And you're making a very valid point. South Africa's largest trading partner, which is China, mainly buys commodities from South Africa. South Africa has for a long time tried to move away from a commodity-based economy to a beneficiated-based economy where manufactured goods and services are exported. Now, I just want to share some hot off the press information. In an interview last week with RSG, I was asked the question, but given the implementation of these new tariffs, we've actually seen an increase in exports and not a decline in exports from South Africa to the United States. The reality, however, is that is purely as a result of platinum group metals and the export of platinum group metals to the United States, which is part of the rare earth mineral grouping. But it takes us back to a commodity-based export economy in opposed to a beneficiated export economy. The US has historically been the largest partner when it comes to buying beneficiated goods and services from South Africa. And I think we need to review and refocus on beneficiated products and how do we get our beneficiated products from South Africa into the US market, because that is where employment is created in South Africa. That is where wealth is unlocked for South Africans. That is where investment is concentrated, not the export of commodities. The debate is out there in terms of export commodities providing employment within the mining sector. But we know South Africa's resources, especially the mining sector, has been in decline for at least the last 5 decades. And we don't see that changing around for the future. So in order for South Africa to reposition itself in its economic relationship with the United States, we also need more support from the Department of Trade and Industry, as well as various other levels of government, to support export of beneficiated products. And we need a trade deal. You may be aware, Chris, that South Africa still does not have a trade deal. Ambassador Jamie Greer have put certain requirements on the floor for South Africa to consider, but we just don't seem to get that done.
That's unfortunate. And, one of the reasons that I've long said that South Africa's most important trade relationship is with the United States because of that beneficiation, which I think we're talking about here. But, I got to feel for you. I got to be honest, because representing South African business interests in the USA, it must be a hard road to hoe. I mean, I'm envious of the Irish. They don't even need to have these chambers of commerce. Everyone just goes to the Irish pub every country they go, and they get all they need. And so they sell Ireland through. Every country's got an Irish pub. We can't find a South African pub everywhere, though, but we can find an Irish pub everywhere. Seriously, though. So, Neil, I want to thank you for your time. It's really great to see you in person. We did this long distance through Zoom last year when everybody was watching. Hopefully people will listen into this and hear some very useful information about the relationship and what the South African Chamber of Commerce USA does here for South Africans, for the expat community, and those who are from South Africa who are just visiting, maybe trying to find out about America. And of course, that handbook you talked about, which could be invaluable for expats and for the recently arrived, or as I prefer to call them, the new arrivals, rather than call them refugees. You're not a refugee forever. So, Neil, any final thoughts you'd like to share with folks out there before we wrap up?
Yeah, Chris, just to say that we've got a very dynamic South African diaspora community in the US. Whether you arrive as a refugee or as an L1 visa holder in a business or an investor visa, EB5, once you get to the shores of the United States, you become part of us, you're part of our community. It doesn't matter how you got here. We definitely don't look at refugees any different than what we do look at investors. And we are here to support and help. Even though it's not our mandate, we also do our best to ensure that all South Africans succeed in the United States, that they are prosperous, functional members of the US society, and hopefully the path leads them to US citizenship, which I think is the reason why most folks want to come to the US.
Well, Neil, whether they become citizens or not, as long as they pay taxes, I'm happy. From Atlanta on a rainy day in the midst of the FIFA World Cup with Neil Diamond from the South African Chamber of Commerce USA. Neil, I want to say bye-bye. Donkey for your time.
Bye, Donkey Chris.
All right, folks, we'll catch you next time. Be sure to hit the like button. Feel free to leave a comment behind. That helps feed that hungry algorithm so that people find this. And I appreciate the approximately 200 people who showed up during this live that was unannounced. And thank once again to Neil. It's a pleasure, as always. It's great to see him down here in Atlanta after making contact with him last year. Folks, we'll catch you later on. I'm flying back to Harrisburg later today, and I'll get in touch with you folks later tonight on the Night Owls. Till then, cheers and be well.